Thank you for watching Conscious Consumer Network. The live stream broadcast is free to view. You can pause and rewind live broadcasts to catch up, or view shows at a later date by accessing our free archives of all shows. Check out our broadcast guide to see what's on. You can show your support by donating to our network support fund. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, or subscribe to the monthly newsletter for updates. We thank you for supporting free and independent media.
I wanna feel your fire, baby, let me dance in your love. I wanna feel your fire, baby, let me dance in your love. I wanna feel your fire, baby, let me dance in your love. I wanna feel your fire, rising from the flames, that dies only to burn again. Let me dance in the rhythm of your flame. If I burn, let me die to burn again. If I burn, let me die to burn again.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Herbal Knowledge Keepers with my co-host Dakota Grannywoman, and today we have our guest Brandon Weston, and I am Blue Star Deer Woman, and the theme of our show today is foraging and folklore. And as usual, Dakota Grannywoman, she's just going to take us down the deep path, and as the base of the show has always been, you will again see demonstrations of the Herbal database, which is the resources that Dakota has been accumulating. I think now we're going on 11, 12 years. There are hundreds of thousands of entries, and there's a dynamic cross-referencing of herbal knowledge from a scientific and from the Grannywoman perspective. And Dakota today will pull up the Herbal database as we share with our guests today and identify some of the folklore and the foraging knowledge, wisdom that's already entered into the database. And as you'll see on the front of the screen is how you can get to the database, and there's also a website up there for Brandon. And if you go to Brandon's website, you can also go to his blog link, where you can catch up with what's going on in his world. And the other link is Full Bloom Productions. This is a Full Bloom Productions. It's a nonprofit, 501c3, and the mission statement has been to empower women's voices. And as we empower women's voices, we embrace everyone, our brothers and our sisters and this entire planet. And the link that you see on the window is, if you like the programs that Full Bloom is bringing to you, that's our page is called Grateful. It's where you can make a contribution. And simultaneously, it's Conscious Consumer Network.tv. This is an international media platform that brings these programs to you, and they are always very grateful to receive donations for them as well. So you actually have two options, and you can do both. And we are not, $5, $5,000. We're happy with whatever you can share. And so now I'm going to bring Dakota on and let her say a little bit more about our guest. And a reminder, there's a chat room. You can sign up, come into the chat room via the live page, and you can ask questions and carry on conversation. And we also occasionally, our co-producer, Biggie, occasionally you put up the phone number. So you're always welcome to call in and join the conversation. And following this, there'll be an archive video always available to review and study later on. All right. Well, blessings to everyone, and thanks for being here.
I guess it's my turn now, right?
It's your turn.
Okay. Anyway, with spring weather on us, we have thoughts of plants in the year ahead. A lot of us are busy getting gardens going. We will have an upcoming show on herbal gardening. And a lot of us are eagerly awaiting the first early spring edible plants and medicines. So this is the perfect time to have this show so everyone's well prepared to make the best use of the plants that are growing in the world around us in such a way that we can sustain ourselves as well as the environment that the plants grow in. And I'll get to the database in just a minute and start showing you what is there that will be helpful to you. But first of all, I want to introduce Brandon. Brandon's one of our well-known Ozark herbal mountain men, folkways, folklorist kind of guys. And I'm going to let him tell you more of his story. Brandon, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. I'm Brandon. So I'm an amateur folklorist, herbalist, folk healer. Basically, I like to go out and collect plants, and that led me to collecting stories about plants from people and herbal knowledge. And so now I'm working on categorizing everything and writing stuff down and, keeping all of this Ozark herbal knowledge that has been around for a long time, but maybe has kind of over the past few years kind of gone into the shadows a little bit. And so that's one of my goals is to help bring that out and help share that knowledge with people.
That's very much appreciated.
Mm-hmm.
I was at an Ozark Cultural Symposium. I presented there in Missouri, at the University of Missouri, sometime, I forget when, but it was sometime in the 2000s. And I was saddened because some of the presentations from the university were about the efforts to reclaim the Ozark herbal knowledge. The professors and their students were scouring the hills and valleys, trying to find people who remembered what their grandmothers had known and taught. And the knowledge was really scarce. And very fragmented, and I encountered it myself talking to some of the hill people who had their Grannywomen around who had been practitioners, and they would show me a plant and tell me what it was called, and it was something completely different that nobody else in the world ever called that plant. And skullcap was a good example. They called, according to them, skullcap was called kidney plant. And so anyway, it's a real challenge, and I'm grateful that you're out there helping to gather it all up. So we're going to go ahead and go to the database now, and y'all are welcome to make comments, ask questions, and we'll just have a free-for-all and see what we have in store for us in the plant world. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I remember how. Okay, here we go. Alrighty. So we're in the herbal database, and one of the things that I want to say is this is the link for this is ultimateherbaldatabase.online. It's the one that I've had up for a while, but I'm creating a new one because this one doesn't work on everyone's browsers for some reason, because I think it's because it's .online instead of .com or whatever. So I'm creating an alternative, a mirror site that will come up for people, but it's under construction right now, and right now being what is this, April the 4th. So it's going to be a few days before it's really ready for the public. But anyway, I wanted to say that because the link that you're going to have for this show is taking you to the new one that isn't quite ready for you yet. Anyway, here we are in the section of the database for wild food. Now, it was kind of a tricky thing for me to think of what to call this, because what is wild food? Initially, when I started out, I was thinking, well, that's the food that nobody planted. And then as I started encountering more and more ornamental plants that are really wonderful edibles, I started thinking, well, wait a minute, I should probably include those too, because nobody planted those either for food. They planted them for beauty. And I think it's really useful because there are a lot of parts of the country where people are not allowed to grow vegetable gardens in their front yards. If you do that, you get busted, you find all kinds of craziness. You can grow flowers, you can grow ornamental plants. So I think this is another aspect of guerrilla gardening where you can grow ornamental plants that are really fabulous edibles and not get into any kind of trouble and enjoy both beauty and food at the same time. And of course, as far as I'm concerned, most of the plants that are growing in the forest for our food are beautiful. So this section to get to it, and as usual, I'll give you some pointers on navigating. If you aren't familiar yet, you can go to our first episode called Introduction to the Database and get a full hour's worth of how this all works. And there's some tutorials on the website too. So up at the top, we've got some pins, and I just clicked on this wild food one here to bring up this section. Anything that is this color of blue is a wild food. And over here, this green, I'm just going to click on these quickly to show you something that's related. So this is a relational database. We want to see the big picture and connect all the dots. So if you just were interested in food in general, you could come here, but we're going to narrow it down to the wild foods today. And a good place, if you aren't familiar with foraging, I advise everybody to start learning about wildcrafting in general. And this section will give you all of the information that you need to know about wildcrafting. And why that's important is because we don't want to harm the source of our food by just going out and picking things willy-nilly and degrading the environment. So there's certain principles that we can use to get what we need, while at the same time helping to nurture the plants themselves and other creatures that depend on those plants. We're not the only ones using these plants, and we don't want to take food away from birds or from the other critters that rely on them. And how to keep the foods fresh, when to pick them, all of that sort of thing is in that wildcrafting section. So the information screen, just to review, can be lifted up. Now you can always scroll. I've got a scroll bar here. You can always scroll this way to see information. You can use scroll bars, or you can lift your screen up all the way to see everything in the information panel. And if you click on these links, they'll take you to another tab to watch videos or read articles. And in the lower part, there may be other links. Do not click on those directly. You'll go out of the database. Instead, you right-click and open in a new tab. And this link, for example, says the presence of wild plants, such as artichoke in the Mediterranean diet, may largely contribute to its therapeutic profile. And that's another reason why this is so important, is we're learning that the nutritional properties of wild foods are much higher than the foods we're growing in our gardens. And yet I do encourage people to grow these wild foods because when you grow them, you have them accessible to you, but don't baby them. They don't like to be babied, and they're diminished in their phytochemicals and nutrients if you pamper them. They're not meant to be pampered. Give them what they need, but mostly what they need is to remain pretty wild. So now I'm just going to click through these. I should say also this part of the database is not finished. I have a lot more foods to enter into this section of the database, but as you'll see, there's plenty here already. On beverages, this one was tricky because almost all of our herbs, I'm clicking on beverage, almost all of our herbs can be turned into a beverage, right? So I'm not going to link all of them to this, but some of the interesting ones I did add here. For example, sunflower tea. That's something you just wouldn't think of.
No.
And the reason sassafras is red is because it's both a medicinal herb and a food. We make root beer out of it. But because it's a strong herb, red is the color for strong medicinal herbs. And I decided it's better to leave it red so that everybody knows that primarily we're thinking of it as a medicinal and that it's strong, which just means that you have to be a little bit careful not to overdo it. Do you see the screen okay, Brandon?
Yep. Yeah, it's up.
Okay. Are any of these familiar to you?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I was going to mention about the sassafras, too, that the leaves historically have been dried and used in gumbo in South Louisiana. They call it filet powder. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you've ever done this, but if you dry out the leaves and mix them with water, it makes almost like a gelatin. It's very mucusy, and so you can use the leaves as a thickener. And actually, the leaves contain less safrole, which is that dangerous chemical, than the roots do. Mm-hmm. And so I still use leaf and root both, but if you have liver problems already, but still want to use the sassafras, the leaves seem to have a lot less of the safrole than the root does. So that would be maybe something a little bit more safer to use as a part of the plan.
Good point. And a couple of other things about the leaves. The phyllo powder, as I understand it, is best made from the younger leaves.
Yeah.
And yet the older leaves in the fall, this is interesting. If you collect the leaves in the fall as they're falling off the tree and changing color, you can store those. And for some reason, they tend to make a very useful tea to drink if you get seasonal affective disorder.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know if that works for everybody, but it's a real cure for a lot of folks. So keep them in mind.
Yeah.
Now,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I guess the only way I can describe it is the caramelization. You know, as the leaves, the sugars and the leaves are turning, there's several plants. I know sumac, you can collect the red leaves as they're turning, and it makes a really nice tea. It's a mild sedative. It also traditionally has been used to induce lucid dreaming. So there's something about that caramelization of those sugars that that transforms the plant into something else, you know. It's very interesting process.
Yeah, that's why the season matters when we're foraging. We can get completely different results from these plants depending on when we're collecting and which part of the plant. So down here at the bottom, there's a breadcrumb trail, and I can get back to that section on beverages, for example, by clicking there. And we've got a black maidenhair fern, and now you see when I run my mouse over it, I can see what the binomial name of it is. Obviously, you really want to be good at plant identification too. And so there's a lot of information in the database training you how to identify plants. So let's just go ahead and go to another area. Burdock, I gave it its own area here because I've used a lot of burdock as a food. The giant burdock, the gobo, is the one I prefer. And here in this section, there are also recipes. You can make a roasted burdock root, for example. So there are a lot of instructions here for how to use these, how to identify them. And burdock, I have it burdock as food because it is also a very powerful medicine. So you can, burdock patties, that's one of my favorites, made with a lot of garlic. And then you can ferment burdock. So I'm just going to move ahead. One of the areas that I think, I'll just go down the list here. This section is a caution because these plants do have some edible parts, but they also have some very toxic parts. And so I figured this was the best way to organize this so that you know American nightshade, yeah, you can, and even the crimson columbine and wisteria, the flowers of wisteria are edible, but nothing else. And
the same with the locust, the black locust tree. The flowers are edible, but all other parts they're an emetic, so it'll make you throw up.
That's I have to add that one. Thank you.
And the May apple too.
Oh yeah.
You can eat the ripe fruit, but if you get the unripe fruit, it will clear you out.
Okay. Clover, we've got a lot of clover, and we tend not to really think of that as a food, and yet it is. So these are different videos that show you how to use it. You can use clover flowers and make a flour, baking flour with it. A lot of plants can be turned into a usable flour for you guys who are worried about gluten. Or when I was in the wilderness, I found that, excuse me, I craved breads and things that were had that floury kind of quality, and being able to turn different plants into flour to make, it doesn't turn out to be just like a bread that you're used to. Yeah. It's more like a flatbread or a biscuit or a pancake, and you can ferment them, and they're quite good.
I years ago, when I had a very hearty apothecary, one of the tinctures that I made was from red clover. And the understanding I was researching, I wish I could remember the name, but this spiritual property that I worked with of red clover is that when I was doing my mentoring sessions, counseling, it was advised that you share the red clover tincture with your client as well as you take it, and it brings you into more of an empathic field, a more intuitive understanding. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and then we do have clover in here as a medicine as well, but it's just not in this section. Now, some plants are used as a seasoning or a condiment, and Korea seed, now that's an interesting one because here in the Ozarks, we have a lot of Korea that's growing wild all over the mountains, and people want to know what to do with it. It's considered invasive. The whole plant is edible, and it's a good medicine, but the seed itself is used as a seasoning. Mm-hmm. In case people can't see these on their screens, I'll just run through them real quickly.
And Dakota, would you demonstrate when they have pictures? Show how you can roll over the picture and it'll pop.
So
there we go. Yeah, I love that part.
So that's tansy, and tansy is quite strong, but it can be used safely as a seasoning. Of course, wild ginger root. See, there it is.
Nice.
Pull it up again. Come on. There we go.
Nice.
Horseweed, Carolina allspice that can be used instead of cinnamon. We have that in the Ozarks. We've got ginger, wild ginger in the Ozarks, the Canadian fleabane, the Carolina allspice. Chasteberry isn't really wild here. This is one that you'll probably have to grow. We do have it growing at the open air meditation sanctuary. But that one, one of the interesting things about vitex or chasteberry, a lot of the women know it as a medicinal herb to help with women's problems, menstrual problems. But it was used as a kind of a pepper substitute by the monks in Europe, and so you can use it that way. Common spice bush, hyssop, Jerusalem oak, goosefoot. Well, Oregon grape jelly is actually not the name of the plant, but you can make a jelly out of Oregon grape. Shepherd's purse, sumac, worm seed. Brandon, do you have any comments about any of these?
No, these are all really good ones. Let's see if I can think of any to add. Well, there's a lot of what we consider weeds that grow that may not be native, like the plantain, yard plantain, dandelion. All of those aren't native, but the great way to get them out of your yard is to eat them.
Yeah.
That's medicine.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a great list. I was going to add, if anybody watching is local to Northwest Arkansas area, I do foraging workshops. I'm about to have 2 in, I think, May, and then a couple workshops in June. So people can follow my website and keep an eye on that, and they can learn about some of these plants.
Great, yeah. Seeing them firsthand is critical.
Now, are these all original natives of the Ozarks, or
No.
have they've immigrated?
Well, the spice, things like the spice bush are native.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and sumac, things like that. But we have like the Paria, or I've heard it called Perilla. That's an introduced plant. They actually use it in Japanese cooking. It's called shiso. And actually, there's 2 different varieties of the plant, and the American variety that we have is edible, but it's not as good as the East Asian variety.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why a lot of people just kind of leave it, because it's a little bit bitter. It has a mint flavor to it, but it's not a pleasant mint flavor.
Mm-hmm.
But it does have a good medicinal value and edible value.
Nice.
That's one of those that was introduced.
Okay, so edible flowers. Spring brings our flowers, and we have a lot of edible flowers here. Now, you can see there's more than fit in the screen. So one of the tricks when that happens is to lower the information panel all the way, and then you can see more of what's here. Now, the reason some of these are white colored is because they're not really wild. And I put them in at a time when I was thinking, okay, ornamentals aren't wild, I'll add them, but I'll leave them as a white color. I might change that now that I'm changing my thinking about this. But look at all the flowers that we can eat. Indian paintbrush. Johnny Jump Up, that's out now. They're pretty small.
Show the picture.
Let's see. I'll have to click on it and see if I have a picture added.
It looked like it was on the edge.
No, that meant that there were. But here's a video that you can watch to see them and learn their attributes. And these are different. There are different types of violets that are called Johnny Jump Up. So it's not like just one. It's in the violet family. It's like a super teeny tiny violet. And
are those little purple ones?
Well, they're not all purple.
Oh, okay.
But they're out now, and they're just. If you see something that's really small and looks like it could be a violet, the leaf might not look quite like that.
Right.
It's likely to be a Johnny Jump Up. So some of the ones that are interesting here, I mean, they're all interesting, but let me just look through this black locust. There's your black locust flower. And the daylily. Okay, I wanted to bring this up, the daylily, because that's one of the first ones that we learn about when we're learning about edible foods. And there's a problem with this. It is a really good edible plant. However, what happened was there's only one type of daylily that's safe to use. And this is the original daylily. Hemerocallis fulva. And what happened was, because it became an ornamental, they started altering it genetically, crossbreeding with other types of daylilies that are not safe to eat. And so we now have a lot of daylilies that are kind of like mixed breeds, and you don't know if there are any toxins in them or if it's truly this one. So I just caution people to, if you're going to plant daylilies, get this one. And if you are going to eat them, now I think the flower is probably safe, but the root is where you could get into trouble. And daylilies are fabulous to stuff, like squash blossoms. You put a little yummy stuff in the middle, and then you can steam them, or you can do some like a tempura type thing. Here's a recipe. A lot of these have recipes attached. So this is a chickweed daylily early spring spread to put on bread or crackers or whatever.
So you're actually, what you're addressing is what we're talking about with GMO with our food. We haven't, I don't know what the word is, if there even is one, but we're basically talking about the GMO of our flowers, especially if we're returning to those foods as foods.
Well, it's, we've always modified them genetically in a natural way with crossbreeding of true strains. And it makes something that's different, but it's not the same as the genetic engineering.
Oh, okay.
But what it is that there are some plants that are safe to eat and other species in the same genus that are not safe. And if you cross those two together, you get into trouble. You don't really know what you're getting. So the daylily is just one of those to be careful of. Let's see, of course the dandelion flowers are fabulous food right now. They're out, and here are some of the phytochemicals. They're in purple that you get when you eat the dandelion flowers. One of the things you can do with them is make a vinegar tincture. So as the blossoms come out, you can pull the green part off and drop those beautiful yellow-orange rays into a jar of vinegar and keep adding to it. And that makes a really nice kind of like a tonic food that to use. You may or may not strain it depending on what you want. But it's like a vitamin pill. It's especially good with carotenes. And here we have a bunch of dandelion flower recipes. So, for example, fried dandelions, Appalachian style, dandelion flower cookies, and then some sites that have a collection of dandelion recipe. And then dandelion wine. Oh, that's incredible. Have you made that, Brandon?
No, I was thinking I've made fritters with them. So you just mix up like a really good batter and then deep fry them, and they're really good that way.
Yeah, they're delicious. Just make sure there aren't any bugs in them, and you can just the easy way is to.
And don't get them from a yard where they spray.
And that's a rule. Yeah, in fact, thank you for mentioning that, because one of the rules that you get in the wildcrafting section is not to harvest anything within 25 feet of a traveled road. And definitely don't harvest where you know there's any kind of pesticide or herbicide spraying. So, that's kind of common sense, but it's so tempting.
Yeah. Well, and it's hard to know sometimes too, because I usually gather mine from people's houses where they don't want to spray. And so they'll have me come out and weed for them, and then I'll eat all the weeds. But I had one experience where I had some friends that recently moved into a house and wanted me to do that. And I had to tell them no, because I didn't know if the tenants before that had done anything to the yard. And so I told them, leave it until next year, and then I'll come out. But unless you know for sure that it hasn't been treated, stay away from stuff like that.
Good point.
Yeah, super important. I did want to mention also, one of the, even though the wild foods are highest nutritionally, when it comes to minerals, the mineral content of the soil in the Ozarks is really low. And so don't depend on any of the foods grown in the Ozarks for your minerals. You're in your gardens, you're going to want to add minerals to your soil. The other area of the world that has a low mineral content, like us, is in the Peruvian Andes. And one of the things that they do in Peruvian medicine to try to help offset that is every herbal formula they make, they add a little bit of an extract of horsetail to it. Now, horsetail doesn't contain tons and tons of minerals itself. There's an energetic property, and of course, part of its bioenergy is in the silica, but something apparently about the horsetail, adding a little bit to the formulas, is helpful. I'm sure in a lot of ways, but it's thought that it may be also to help boost either the bioavailability of the minerals, something about that. But just be aware, like when you read about the mineral content of plants, of herbs, of wild foods, take into account that in the Ozarks, they may not be as high as they say, and that's really something to be careful of. So looking at some of these goldenrod flowers, I'll just read through a few of them. The forsythia flowers that are out now, the beautiful yellow flowers. Now, all of these colorful flowers are think of them as a fabulous source of carotenoids, some of them, and of course, the vitamin content is going to be really, really high. Vitamin C, a lot of different phytochemicals in them. The Eastern Spring Beauty, violet flowers. Let me just scroll through here.
I was going to mention about the redbud.
Yeah.
Redbud flowers are really tasty, but I usually tell people to wait until the flowers make the fruit, which is, it looks like a bean. It looks like kind of a snow pea. And if you wait until after the flowers, it makes this edible bean. They actually, in places in the Ozarks, they call it the bean tree. Last year, I think from a handful of trees, I got probably 2-gallon bags full of these beans. And you can cook them like you do snow peas or anything like that. And if they're young enough, while they're still tender, you can eat them raw. And they have a lot more vitamin content than the flower. So usually I tell people, wait until it turns into the bean.
Yeah, I like both of them. We've got a lot of Eastern redbud around us. And so I'll do some flowers. But definitely for the beans, and I like them when they actually look like snow peas before
Yeah,
the beans here.
when they're a little bit bigger.
But you really have to watch it because
Yeah.
that happens real fast.
Yeah. Yeah, they go from being tender and kind of sweet to being just stringy and inedible in a matter of like days usually.
Yeah. Yeah, and it seems like they stay really teeny tiny, and then boom, they're just right, and then boom, they're not right anymore.
Also, for anybody that wants to collect the flowers or the beans, make sure that, so when it comes off the tree, it's going to have a little stem, and then it's going to have these tiny little hair-like stems that attach to the flowers or the beans. So take out a pair of scissors or something like that and cut those strings to detach it. Don't detach it from the tree by the base, because if you do that, that actually will affect its blooming the next year. So make sure you cut it, leave the stalk and the strings attached to the tree, and then just cut around those. Because in the wild, you know, when they grow up and they fall off the tree, they detach from those little stems, usually the next spring. So you see all of the dead beans everywhere. So what we're doing is we're replicating that so that they'll bloom in that spot again next year.
Excellent. Yeah, excellent point. That's part of this kind of craft, the wild crafting, where you know how to harvest things so that you don't cause damage, and you want to keep that food supply coming. It reminds me of harvesting roots, and we'll get there, but and rezones and things like that, where you replant the crown, or you cut it in such a way that there's still a bud attached, and replant it so that that root can keep growing. You don't just take a whole root and let that be the end of the story. Tulip flowers are edible. Let's see, I'm just quickly looking. Kudzu blossoms. If you have kudzu growing around you, it's meant to be eaten. That's a good example of what Brandon was talking about. Like some of these plants would be controlled if people just ate them or used them as medicine. Let's see here, English daisy. Well, anyway, I think I better go on because I always run out of time. All right, now here is an edible identification series. And these are just a nice series of videos that give you some important pointers. I really like them. And they go through different plants. So it's a good starting place.
Eat the Weeds is a good website too.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that in here.
Yeah. He's really good about identification too, so making sure you know what you're looking at.
Exactly. And let's see, inner bark is edible. These are trees that have edible inner bark, and you can learn how to make bark bread here. This is a Wikipedia entry. But within this, there are other recipes of how to use the bark. Slippery elm, we don't have much slippery elm anymore here in the Ozarks, and I don't encourage people to pick that because I think that it's in danger now. So it's there, you know, some of this is like, it's good to know this. If something terrible happened and you were, let's say, lost in the middle of the woods for weeks and you had to eat, then yeah, if you see slippery elm, it's going to save your life. It's worth doing. Okay. Now the mushrooms. Here the identification is especially important, and there are some good sites to visit here. Vitamin D is available. Vitamin D3 can be obtained through mushrooms if you dry your mushrooms out in the sun for a while. they create vitamin D3 in them. So, and there are some parts of the world where that's how they get their D3, where they can't get it in the sun all the time.
Is that all mushrooms?
Mm-hmm.
So like store-bought
Yeah,
mushrooms, just put them out in the sun.
yeah.
Ooh, I like that.
So we've got, I'm not going to name all of these, but I just want to show you here. This is part of the botany course.
Where the whole course is on
Yeah,
mushrooms?
no, the whole course is on botany, but there's a section on mushrooms. So I'm just clicking through this. This is level 4 of the botany. And so here you can learn about the taxonomy, preserving specimens, how to take spore prints and all that kind of stuff. Also, there are GMO mushrooms now, so be aware of that.
There's a good book called Mushrooms. I think it's called Mushrooms Demystified. It's fairly old, probably, 70s, 80s, but it's still in print. So you can get new copies or used copies. It's a really big book.
Okay.
But if you are interested in identification, it's probably one of the best. It goes into spore prints and all of this other stuff. There's some mushrooms that the only way to tell between the poisonous look-alike and the edible one is doing a spore print. So you actually have to look and see what the color of the spores is, the shape of the spore, things like that. And this book goes into detail about how to do that.
Oh, excellent.
I just want to, for our viewers, and you may be watching this from the archive site, is just a reminder that Dakota just made reference to a botany course, that this herbal database has several courses that are being offered as well, so you go into depth on a subject. But also what I want to put out to our viewers is that we are really putting a call out to encourage getting this herbal database in the hands of educators and educational institutions, herbalists, physicians, nurses, anyone and everyone that could really reap the benefits of this. So if you know someone in your circle of people, community, please don't hesitate to direct them to the herbal database and encourage them to add it to their library.
Okay. So now on to the roots, bulbs, and rhizomes. And as you can see, there are a lot of them in here already. There will be more. I'm still adding. But let's just take, for example, water shield. This grows here in the Ozarks, or in Arkansas. I think you can find it. Have you ever found water shield, Brandon?
No. In more warmer water, because our waters freeze.
Too cold. Yeah. So
our climate's changing though. We're getting warmer and warmer, and so you may start seeing some of this stuff up here too.
Yeah, it's hard. Exactly, it's hard to tell what's happening. So also in this section, you'll find information on edibility, and if there's any toxicity to the plants, it's also in this section of the database. So edible roots, bulbs, and rhizomes. Let me just look at this real quickly. Chicory is a great one. People think of it as a weed, but it's an excellent medicine, fabulous for the liver. Some folks, I remember we used to buy coffee that was mixed with chicory. Mm-hmm. And on its own, it makes a really nice drink with a roasted chicory. And it doesn't really lose its medicinal qualities when you roast it. And the roasted chicory and, even the dried unroasted, or eating it as a food, especially when it's mixed with coffee. Mm-hmm. It helps to reduce the acidity of the coffee. So if you have a problem with that, adding some chicory is really, really helpful.
Roasted dandelion root is also really good for that.
Right.
Yeah. Roasted dandelion root. And I'm just looking at this real quickly for some interesting ones. Here's an example of some of the, let's see, wild hyacinth. You know, that's a really beautiful plant that could be grown in your garden. And you would have a root that you could eat. Looky there. Wouldn't that be pretty in your garden?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a root vegetable that you could be growing and nobody would know the better of it. Now, here's some information on how to prepare it. So the Indians, and of course there's a lot of information in here on how the tribes process these foods, but this is cooked for quite a long time, 24 hours in a fire pit. And then it becomes brown and sweet, or you could mold it into cakes and dry it for later use. So this section shows you a lot of plants that could provide you your root vegetables and keep you safe of the law. I used to grow chufa in my garden, yellow nutsedge, and that's a fabulous tasting little bulb that tastes like, to me, it tastes like almonds.
Mm.
So you can have like underground almonds. It looks like a grass. And so you could have a grassy part of your yard. And then you can dig it up and you've got almonds underneath there.
Nice.
In Egypt, they made beer out of it. Okay, and I'm looking at the time. We're going to have to move along here. So I'm going to kind of speed through this. We've got some parts of the plant. It's the stems you really want to go for. We see burdock again and again and again. Sassafras stem. Now that is like the stem attached to the leaf, and that's a trail nibble. Thistle stalks, alligator weed, and sometimes the shoots. So in the springtime, that's when you start looking for shoots to come up. And here we see the bamboo shoots are edible, canna lily shoots. When the common milkweed starts coming up, that's edible. And there are a lot of these, there are instructions for using them. So feel free once you identify them. And the Solomon seal shoot, that was a favored food of Taoist monks coming out of winter to restore their strength. And we've got spring edibles. Now this is mostly, I haven't attached a lot of plants to it, but that information is going to be in your information screen with just kind of general information on what to look for in the spring, but of course that's scattered throughout. And let's see here. We've got a lot of fruits. Air potato that grows here in the Ozarks. Here's your mayapple fruit. Ivy gourd, a type of a dogwood. The Kusa dogwood makes an edible fruit. And if you look under berries, there are a lot of berries that you wouldn't really realize are food berries, like the hobblebush, the sumac berry, of course we know, the partridge berry. We think of partridge berry as, a lot of us, as a medicinal, but it's a good food. American spikenard, dewberry. And you see up here, some of these are linked up here to conditions they treat. So if you have a diet that's high in berries, and here's where the wild foods are especially good, that helps treat tendinitis. They found that people who have a diet that's high in berries helps to prevent and treat Parkinson's, colon cancer, and keep you from getting overweight. And then, of course, if you click on those, you'll see studies that demonstrate that. So, okay, as usual, I'm just clicking through quickly now so we can get to all of Brandon's stories that he has to share with us. Here's the energetics attached. And let's see, we're going to go to greens. Now we have tons and tons of edible greens that you can use as pot herbs or in salads. Daisy fleabane, there's your perilla leaf, plantain, poke salad, purslane. So, did you have something to say on that, Brandon?
No, that's a really good list. I was looking through some of those that I'd already eaten this spring. They're starting to come up right now.
Yeah, I'm looking too. Now, if you want to tap for sap, these are trees that you can tap. So we don't just tap red maple. You can tap birch, walnut. I used to tap sycamore and get a really nice drink from sycamore. The American hop hornbeam can be tapped, the butternut. A lot of trees can be tapped in the spring to get a health beverage. It's quite tasty. It'll be high in carbs and
one of my favorite things to tap is the shagbark hickory. You can also tap. And actually a better way of getting a really good beverage from that is, the bark, it hangs off of it in sort of scales. And you take off those scales and then roast them in an oven at a very low temperature until it starts to ooze. So that sap's being released, and then you boil that, and you can boil it down to a really thick syrup, and it's very tasty.
Oh, yeah. I bet. Does it taste at all like nuts?
No, it kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It kind of tastes like, a hickory smells. It kind of has that fragrant smell to it. Okay. It kind of has a little bit of that, and then it's just sugary sweet.
Okay.
And what exactly do you mean by tapped?
Oh, okay. So what you do, now people use different things, but I used elder, I hollowed out elder twigs to make like a tube, a hollow tube.
Right.
And then you drill just a little ways into the tree, I did it about waist height, and hang a bucket from it. And in the spring, the sap will drip down there. Yeah, and that's how you tap maple trees. You get maples. I had maple trees in the wilderness that I used to tap. Yeah, and it's really a fun thing. So now, from all of that, you can make fermented beverages. So there's a huge section in here on fermented foods with recipes and instructions on how to do it all. You can make rosehip wine, a Bloody Mary cocktail, berry cocktails. These are all fermented. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I just want you to see that we can make fabulous foods from these foraged items. The imagination just runs wild with all of this. And if I go up to fermented foods itself, you see fermented burdock, fermented condiments, the vegetables, how to make fermented nut and seed cheese. So if you're out in the woods and you have a hankering for cheese and there's not a cow walking by, of course this would take some time, but if you're gathering the nuts and seeds, you can ferment them and make a cheese. And so it's a great way to preserve. So if you're gathering the mushrooms, they go bad pretty fast, so ferment them. So I think that's all I want to do on this. As you can see here, folks, this is a wild growing part of the database, and it will help you really get some mastery over what's going on with these wild foods. And yes, join Brandon and anyone in your area who is taking people out to introduce them firsthand to these plants. And also let us know if you try any of this. any of these recipes, you come up with something, share it with us, because that's how we all learn. One last thing before I turn it over to Brandon. I am going to be starting a Facebook group for people who are using the database so that we can have discussion about what y'all are finding there. If you have tried out a recipe making fermented pesto and tweaked it or just loved it more than anything you've had in a while, you can share that with us, and of course health conditions, all that sort of thing.
Nice. And pictures of
And
those
pictures.
delicious dishes.
Oh, totally. Okay, so now I'm going to bring Brandon back. Okay, Brandon. So I know that you have a lot of wonderful folklore to share with us, and obviously stuff about plants, and you are going to do some screen sharing as well. So I'm just going to turn it over to you now. Oh, right on the dot. Oh, perfect.
Yeah, well done.
All right. Well, yeah. So that I'm just amazed by that database that you all have worked on. There's so much information there, and I'm looking forward to being able to look through that.
Oh, by the way, Brandon, before you go any further, you're in the database too.
No.
Your website, your work, everything is in there. I mean, not everything of your work, but
Right.
your website and all that stuff. So people can find you under Mountain Man Medicine. Isn't that the name of it? I have to look.
Or just put his name in the search box,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah. So that'll take you to some of the things that I'm working on right now, and just to kind of talk about a couple projects that has really. These projects is what's made me so interested in learning more about Ozark folklore. And the first project that I started, I guess a couple years ago, it was just going to turn into a writing every day for a year project where every day I would post just a topic about Ozark folklore, folk magic, folk healing, and we can make some distinctions between those here in a minute. But it got to the point where I was very good about writing every day, and then kind of trailed off from there. So there's not quite 365 entries, but I'm working on it still.
Mm-hmm.
But that has turned into a couple recent projects that I've started, and one of those is the Ozark Encyclopedia, which can be found on my blog, which is just ozarkhealingblog.com, or you can find it on my website. And that has been kind of the culmination of a lot of my research. So I've been working on it for about 3 years now. And one of the things that makes this different from other Ozark resources is that I'm compiling all of the resources that I can find anyway, together into these entries. And so it just goes, A to Z. And I'm dividing it up between what I call the natural medicine, which is the plant-based medicines, and then the religious and magical medicines, which includes things that aren't necessarily ingested into the body, but used as washes or used in folk charms, things like that. And so basically when you're looking at the document, it's just an entry, and then it has everything that's being said by the folklorists. So when we talk about Ozark folklore, there aren't that many resources out there. We pretty much have a few sources, one of which is Vance Randolph, who some people will have heard of. He was at the University of Arkansas, and he was working in this area. Actually, I have one of his books I was going to show. So this one, it's backwards, but Ozark Magic and Folklore is his most well-known work, but he wrote a lot of stuff. So he's one of our folklore resources that I'm working with. He's now passed, but all of his material is at the university, so I have access to all of that. And also his wife, Mary Parler, has a huge collection of work on Ozark folklore, folk songs, medicine, all sorts of stuff. And then there's Otto Ernest Rayburn, who has a bunch of stuff. There was a couple others that I'm blanking on right now. But basically, we don't have a ton of resources. But what we do have, the resources we do have, are very good. So I wanted to make a work that basically compiled what all these folklorists were saying about these subjects. So you may have an entry that is, I think one that I recently published was, let's see, beads. So certain types of beads, colors of beads, what were these beads worn for? So basically you would have an entry, and then you'll have what all of the folklorists have said about that. And so it's been an interesting project for me, and it's been one of the projects that I wish I would have had as a kid. So I wish there would have been a resource like this when I grew up, because I wouldn't have had to do so much work trying to find all of this stuff.
Well, may you be blessed for the less work people have to do from this point on.
Right. Well, and I'm hoping that resources like this will get more and more people interested in what the Ozarks has to offer. And not just by way of our folklore, but also how is this folklore, how is this medicine being used today? There are still people living in the Ozarks. My family goes way back here. And so how are these folk tales being changed through these families? How is this folk knowledge being changed? What's being brought into this culture? And so that's one of the hopes that I have with this project. There's another project that's going along with that called the Ozark Charm Book, where I look at some of the verbal charms, we might call them spells, but these verbal charms that would have been memorized by people, things like charms to stop blood, thrash charms for curing thrush, different things like that I've collected and have collected from different sources. And so that's one of the other projects that's kind of going along with the Ozark Encyclopedia. And those entries I'm posting on my blog, so people can follow that. And I'm hoping at some point to be able to publish these things for people to have too. So, but my interest in Ozark folklore pretty much comes from childhood. I grew up in Northwest Arkansas with my family, and my family, both sides, go way back in the Ozarks. And then before that, they came mostly from the Appalachians. And when we look at Ozark culture and Appalachian culture have a lot of crossover. And it's mostly because the Ozarks were pioneered, I guess you could say, by Appalachian people. And so there's a lot of cultural exchange there. We don't have as many of the plants as the Appalachians have, so we don't have trees like sourwood. We don't have all of the rhododendrons, the laurels, the mountain laurels, things like that. But culturally, there's a lot of similarity. And one resource I wanted to mention for anybody interested in Appalachian and Ozark folklore is the Foxfire series.
Oh, yeah.
I've probably heard of. So those are all focused on Appalachian people. But there's a lot of crossover there. So there's a lot of similarities in between Ozark and Appalachian culture. And there's actually a similar magazine that came out. You can find all of the entries, all the magazine issues online for free. It's the Bittersweet magazine. And that was actually centered in the Missouri Ozarks. But it's the Foxfire series for the Ozarks. Okay. So it's not as well known. It's not as well published, but you can find the old issues of the magazine online, and it's a very good read for anybody that's interested in Ozark folklore.
Could you also say that for what is it, Mother Earth, Mother News? What was that famous?
Mother Earth News, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was another one, another magazine, the Ozarks Mountaineer. Was another really good magazine. Unfortunately, those aren't online, so they haven't digitized those. But if you have access, most local libraries will have collections of those old magazines, and they're very good resources to look through for Ozark folklore. They do a lot of things that the Foxfire series does. So they'll look at certain folkways and folk crafts, cooking recipes, things like that. So those are both really good resources. And so for me, growing up, I grew up with a family that enjoyed, making odd remedies and things like that. So for me, it was more of a cultural thing. And so it wasn't really something that I had to focus on. It was something that was just kind of there. And so later on, as I got into college and got around all these really good library resources that the university has to offer, I was able to actually look more into this stuff and say, this isn't just weird things that my family did. This is an actual culture that we have. And so a lot of those resources like Vance Randolph, Mary Parler, they all started coming up for me. And so the more I looked at this stuff, the more I was drawn to it, the more that I wanted to let other people know about it. And so then I started the blog and I started writing and things like that. So for me, it was sort of a gradual progression into doing what I do.
Brandon, where would the culture of witches meet folklore?
So in the Ozarks, we have this nice mix of what I consider to be the natural medicine, the plant medicine, and the faith-based medicine, which is like the use of charms and things like that. And so for the longest time, this was just considered medicine. There was no real separation between them. So you might go to somebody like a yarb doctor who works with the plants, or a power doctor who works with prayers and charms, or a Grannywoman, something like that. So you might go to these people and they might give you a tea to drink, but they might also give you a prayer to say, or they might give you a charm bag to hold, or something like that. Or even if you don't see them doing something, they may incorporate this faith, this religion. I guess not religion, folk religion. They might incorporate this into the healing process. So they may be doing some other stuff that you don't see. But generally, at least when we're talking about Ozark folklore, people avoid using the term witch, just because folk healers, at least historically, have walked a very thin line between being socially accepted and being an outcast. And so
because essentially, we're essentially talking about the earth religion, Wicca. Right. So yeah, I was just wondering, where did they depart and create their own anonymity?
So most of it, what we might consider to be traditional witchcraft or something like that, these healers would have had aspects of that, but they would have avoided calling themselves a witch or something like that, mostly because the witch was considered the other. And so you see in certain folk charms, things like that. Actually, I have a folk charm that I'm about to publish to my blog, which is called To Beat a Witch. And it's the idea that the witch is the other. It's the person that is sending the sickness or sending the harm to you. And this is just a word that they applied to this, because essentially you have a folk healer who could easily be called a witch at any point just by somebody, accusing them of harming somebody. So they're working this folk magic, but they're working it in such a way that heals, rather than what they consider the witch does, which is to cause that harm. And so the folk charm, I'm sorry, what?
In Europe, as a lot of the folk healing developed in Europe, the common people called them healers. The power structure was the one called them witches.
Right.
And So among the people, the practitioners of energetic medicine, whatever dimension you want to refer to, they always looked at it as healing.
Right.
And they were put down, and that continues using different language, but
Right.
they were put down by the administration, the government, and the religious body, the authoritative religious body, with that term witches, which is why it was so much not used by the people.
Well, my understanding is that the derivative of the word witches means powerful woman.
Yeah. Or wise. I mean, our word wizard.
They called them wise women. Yeah, they also called them wise women.
The word wizard has its origin in a wise person. So a lot of these words just meant, somebody that knows something you don't. So you go to find the person that knows something that you don't to help you with your problem.
Right.
And so in the Ozarks, you hear the term witch used with water witches, which are the dowsers. And you hear it sometimes with white witch, which means somebody that is doing what's considered good work as opposed to the bad work. And it's interesting to look at the figure of the witch as this sort of other figure, because a lot of times, at least in spells and in the healing work that I've read from folklorists and also have experienced through interviewing people, the witch doesn't exist. The witch isn't a person. The witch, sometimes they'll say the witch over the mountain, or the witch on the other side of the hill, or the witch at the bottom of the creek, things like that. But there's not a person at the bottom of the creek or over the hill. It's just that other that you are sending the sickness back to. And it's interesting how this ties in with a lot of Pennsylvania German folk magic, Braucherei, Hexerei. It's also called powwowing. So it's this folk magic tradition that was brought from rural Germany to Pennsylvania German communities in Pennsylvania along the East Coast. Then that was brought into the Southern Appalachians with German families, and then that was brought into the Ozarks by those same families. And so there's a lot of tie-in here. And in Pennsylvania German folk magic, a lot of times they send the sickness to the Hexenkampf, which is, or I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but it's the witch mountain. And the witch mountain is this ethereal, mythological mountain where all the evil goes. So it's not an actual mountain, or in some cases in rural Germany, it is an actual mountain. But it's just that location that the stuff is being sent to. Now, a lot of times you will have the figure of the witch being an actual person, in which case, the healer makes sure to not identify themselves with that witch or work against that witch in, however way they need to, just because the healer is socially accepted and the witch is not. And so if you are in a community where it's going to be hard for you to survive on your own, being socially outcast, you're going to do everything you can to not have to identify with witchcraft or with whatever you consider to be, malicious folk magic. And so we see in Ozark folklore, there's a big difference between people that are called healers or power doctors, root doctors, things like that, and people that are called witches. Today, it's a little bit different. I've encountered healers in the Ozarks who consider themselves to be witches. They're reclaiming that term. And I think that is an important part of understanding Ozark folk healing today, is understanding that people are reclaiming that, and it has very different connotations today for some people. But I think it's interesting that we still look at historically, and at least in the folklore, what this has meant. And it's being associated with a witch has always been a bad thing in the Ozarks, even though essentially the healer may be doing the same thing that the witch would be doing. It's just one is considered to be doing good work, the other is considered to be doing bad work. I'm sorry.
What this brings up, which is a deep understanding of all of this, is the power of words.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
you use your words very, very carefully. And, and people who are working with power learn to choose their words wisely. So that's part of what all of this comes down to. It's like
Exactly.
there's not like a dictionary that you can go to that's completely objective and you can just define this word or that word. Not when you're working with power. It's like,
It reminds me, one of the stories I like to tell, especially, I've given lectures about Ozark folk healing before, and the witch issue always comes up because it's an important issue to talk about. And so you always have somebody that asks, well, why don't you consider yourself a witch? Why don't you join this community? Things like that. And I have no problems with anybody that is joining this communities. But one of the stories I like to tell is one of the first sort of folklore collecting trips I had. I had a few different informants that I was going to be visiting, and one of them was a little older than my grandparents, so late 80s, mid to late 80s. And I made the mistake of asking him if he had any stories about folk magic, and he stopped talking to me because I used the word magic.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I had asked him, later, I got to the point where I would ask people, do you have any stories about when you were sick? What did you do when you had such and such? Or what did you do when you had a cold? Or, what did your parents do when they were sick? Things like that. And you get a lot more information that way. And some of this stuff may be considered folk magic. Anthropologists, we would consider verbal charms, written charms, talismans, things like that. That's folk magic. That's these these supernatural sort of magics that are used to fight evil, fight sickness, things like that. But you have to learn the language, especially when you're talking to some of these older folks, because you mention magic, you mention witchcraft, things like that, and they're gonna turn off because it's been so ingrained in the culture. Those things, that's what you're fighting against. You're fighting against magic. You're fighting against witchcraft because those words mean something very different for these people.
Exactly. And they also know that just the environmental climate that you create for that conversation is part of that magic.
Yes,
and that's very lost art, and we're kind of trying to recreate it in a technological society. Like, it's really cool to have crystals and minerals. But we don't have that ethereal knowledge base that they don't want to talk about. It's what we don't talk about that's the real magic.
Right.
Also, it is, as you were saying, it is cultural. Like, there's a common understanding. I recall one of the practices in birthing was, of course, the men are kept out, but the woman who is birthing, the midwives would take the shirt of the husband and put it under the bed, and that was a very important thing to do. And when you get into it and reflect on some of that, what was happening is she was at a perhaps subconscious or even conscious level being comforted by having some kind of presence of her husband there with her. Even though he was removed from the room, there was something of his that was there in an important place in the room, so that she had a connection to him. So a lot of these things, especially when it's within that cultural mindset, has a deep, deep effect on the mind. And we know the mind has a deep effect on whether we heal from something or not.
Exactly. Well, that reminded me of putting the axe or putting a knife under the bed also. to help cut the birth pains.
Mm-hmm.
I had an entry a few days ago on axes in the Ozark Encyclopedia, so there's a lot of good information out there. But yeah, so that was one thing that I had to learn pretty quickly, was how my language was going to work when talking to people, because even though I grew up in this area, I grew up with a family who had at least lived in the city, what was considered the city, for a while. Mm-hmm. And so their language had changed. And so I had to relearn the language that my great-grandparents would have known, or my grandparents would have grown up with when talking to people. And so a lot of, when we talk about herbal medicines, a lot of that information was freely given. So people like talking about, what weird medicines their parents made them take, drinking things like coal oil and turpentine and things like that if you have a cough. So these things people freely give. But I found that I had to get to know people a little bit more before they started talking about prayer, before they started talking about maybe some of the other things that they did. And I remember one time I was talking herbs with a lady, and I mentioned, because I knew this was something that was done, I mentioned if she had ever, as a kid, had to wear asafoetida in a bag. Asafoetida is a really noxious smelling plant. I've also heard it called asafoetida, or I think in Southeast Asian Indian cooking they call it hing. But it's this really noxious smelling plant. It kind of smells like fenugreek, if you've ever had fenugreek. And so it's really powerful smelling plant, and it's a medicinal plant, but it was also used, it was worn because these horrible smells were thought to keep away horrible things. And so if it smells bad, it's going to keep sickness away. It's going to keep evil away. And so one thing that people used to do is they would make their kids wear them in bags, usually muslin or cotton bags. So they would, during the winter, especially when colds were around. And so they would pin them to their collars, or they would make them wear it. And so I asked her about this, and she at first was like, well, I don't remember if we did that. But her husband broke in and was like, oh, you did that? We all did that. And so then they started talking about other things that they wore. They talked about, the husband talked about having to wear red glass beads when he was a kid because he had nosebleeds, and that was thought to keep away nosebleeds. They also buckeyes for luck, for good luck, things like that. And so I got to the point where I knew how to introduce these subjects to make people talk about them. And so then people, will freely give prayers, things like that, which is, for me, I like plants. I love plants. I love working with plants, but it's the folk magic. It's those little aspects, those prayers, things like that. That's where I'm really interested in stuff like that, because that for me is a very deep culture, I think.
Yeah. Never mind. I started to say something and then I stopped.
So one thing I wanted to talk about was, where did this knowledge come from?
Yeah.
Especially in the Ozarks. That's one of the interesting areas for me, is looking and seeing where this knowledge came from. And the Ozarks, we're an interesting people. We're a mixture of Scotch-Irish, German, English. We're a mixture of indigenous peoples. We're a mixture of African peoples. And so culturally, we are a mixture. And so when we're looking at folk magic, folklore, folk healing, we are able to look at these individual pieces and trace them back to these places that they came from. And so to just give kind of a lineage of Ozark folk healing, we mostly were settled by Scotch, Irish, and German immigrants from the Appalachians. But But even before that, there were what were called the Old Settler Cherokee, who came in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and settled much of what is now considered to be the Ozark National Forest. And so there's a deep Cherokee culture that goes through the Ozarks. So the Appalachian people would have already been exposed to that culture. Many people, like my family, are a mixture of the white European settlers and the indigenous peoples. So they would have had both a mixture of European folk knowledge and the indigenous folk knowledge, which in a lot of cases merged very well because they were essentially doing the same things, just a little bit different from each other. So when those people then moved to the Ozarks, they settled here because it was so similar to the Appalachians. The mountains were similar. The plant life was similar. They already had that Cherokee culture that they were used to. And so they settled here because it was so much like their homeland. And it's said that the people settled the Appalachians because it's so similar to rural Germany, rural Ireland and France and places like that. They were used to the hills. They were used to being surrounded by plants. And so they naturally went to the places that were like their homeland. And so we can see parts of Europe, European folk healing, European herbalism. The episode of the show that I watched, I can't remember her name. Anne, where she was talking about the use of bitters in Germany, things like that. You can see that throughout the Ozarks and the Appalachians. People using bitters, bitter herbs, wormwood, things like that. And that goes right back to European sources. That goes back to Germany. That goes back to England. That. And so you can see the European folk magic, the folk healing, but you can also see the fingerprint of the indigenous peoples. When we got to the Appalachians, people didn't know what they were looking at. There were some plants that they brought with them. There were some plants that have European variants, but 60-70% of the plants they had never seen before, didn't know what they were looking at. And so that's where you have the influence of the indigenous peoples who did know what they were looking at and did know what they were talking about. So they were actually able to help the settlers survive in a lot of these situations. And the settlers sometimes just took that knowledge and went on. Sometimes they intermarried with these people. They became a part of these nations. And so they had a much deeper folk knowledge. And then all of that was brought to the Ozarks. So we see this huge sort of melting pot of information from a lot of different sources. But that, for me, is what's most interesting, is being able to piece these things together, pull them apart and say, you know, where did this come from? This isn't just European. This can't be European because they didn't know what this plant was. So it had to have come from indigenous people. So giving credit where credit is due is really important to me.
So you're actually creating an international encyclopedia of folklore.
Essentially, yeah. So where I can, I will trace things back to older sources. So one example, in Ozark folklore, lightning wood is very important. So lightning striking a tree and breaking it apart. Sometimes the ash would be drank. Sometimes the ash would be applied to the body. Sometimes the wood would be taken and used in certain ways. And to my knowledge, that doesn't have European sources, even though you can find certain lightning lore. The way it's used in the Ozark is much closer to the way the Cherokee used it and the Creek, Muskogee peoples, so the Southeast tribes. And so when I talk about lightning wood in the encyclopedia, I make sure to trace it back to those other people. This is a possible origin for this practice.
Interesting. So you may very well be creating some of the lost bridges.
Yeah.
Actually,
that's one of the things that I really want to do is there are some things, practices and things that I can't find where it comes from.
Yes.
So, to my knowledge, it's something that's just done in the Ozarks. And that's
Well, Brandon, in a lot of ways, if you look at the modern day situation in our country, you really are healing on that magical realm, immigration.
Mhm. Yeah.
Because
Absolutely.
when it comes down to it, we're all immigrants.
Oh, absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
it's really beautiful. I mean, as a spiritual art in the ethereal world, what you are mending.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's important for me. Because I come from a very mixed family background, it's important for me to tell the story like it actually is. And to, like I said, give credit where credit is due. And so one aspect that's been hard for me to talk about is the Ozarks at one point had quite a few black communities, old Ozarks. So we're talking about 1830s through the 1860s, 1870s, where a lot of this folklore is coming from. And so there were these communities that were eventually decimated by the white population. The people were driven out. They were driven to other bigger cities. A lot of them settled in Little Rock. A lot of them settled in Kansas City, Springfield, places like that. But for the longest time, hill folk were intermingling with the indigenous people and also with freed slaves that settled in these areas. And so there are African influences to our folk magic and medicine that need to be talked about too. And so there you can look at certain practices, prayers, the use of certain items, and you can take that back to African populations, to the black populations.
It's interesting. I'm trying to remember her name while we're sitting here, because I think she works with our public radio, and she did an extensive research on the black population in this immediate area and the decimation of them. But I understand that I think her videos have been archived in our local library, which is where we're doing this broadcast from today. And, I'm going to try and retrieve her name, because I would think that she went so deeply into the culture that I'll bet there's plenty of bits and pieces of the likes of what you're teaching.
Brandon, one of the other things, just a slightly different topic, but my family was also from this area, going way back. I don't even know how far back. They were the real McCoys. But as I was growing up, my family was moving around a fair amount, and I moved around quite a bit too. It was just kind of seemed like everybody I knew started one place, wound up someplace else, and that's just how the world seemed. And then when I came to the Ozarks in the 1990s, I was shocked. Probably my first culture shock was that nearly everybody I met had lived here their whole life. Their families had lived here their whole lives. Young people, they didn't really want to go anywhere else. They might go somewhere for a year or two and then come back. It was like, this was the most deeply rooted culture of mixed, people with mixed backgrounds in a way, but deeply rooted culture where people were satisfied to be here. They didn't feel the need to go exploring the world the way I did and my peers did.
Yeah, and a lot of that goes back to the importance of the family, the importance of the clan. And so what you have are these insular groups of people. These would have been people that immigrated as families, but even in rural Scotland, rural Germany, wherever they might have been, there was that tight-knit family. Basically the town you lived in was the family, the extended family at least. And so they brought that mentality with them. All the hill folk did when they settled. And so these areas have always been very tight-knit communities, mostly based upon family line. But as families have gotten smaller and smaller, that might extend to, everybody that lives on this mountain. So it might not be your family, but it's your family, your extended family at least. So yeah, that's a really interesting part about the Ozarks and Appalachian culture, is this focus on the family. There's also historically been a difference between, there's been 3 different types of people in the Ozarks. There have been the valley people, who were considered to be the farmers. A lot of times they were not from the Appalachians, they were from other areas, and they settled in the Ozarks for the farming. We have several along the Buffalo River, along all these rivers, of very fertile land. And so the valley people were the farmers that moved in. Then you have the town people who lived in the towns wherever they might have popped up. And then you have the hill folk. And the hill folk traditionally have been those tight-knit families that were mostly mixed race, that came from other rural areas and settled in the hills. These were not people that were farming for a business. You can't farm in the hills for a business. As anybody that's tried to make a garden on a hillside knows, around here especially, you cannot do it. You are farming to feed your family. You are mostly gathering wild foods. You're mostly gathering wild medicinal plants, things like that. And so the hill folk have always been much more racially and culturally diverse than the valley folk, just because it was based upon that community. It was based upon, for lack of a better word, that tribe. And so some of these people were Cherokee or Osage or Caddo or whatever, Muskogee, but a lot of them, they were their family. They were their tribe in and of themselves. So a lot of the knowledge, the herbal knowledge, the folk magic knowledge, was kept with these hill folk because they were so insular, because they were so cut off from the city folk, from the valley folk. And generally, it was the valley folk or the city folk that were going to the hill folk for medicine.
Right.
They were going to them when they had no other solution. And so the hill folk traditionally have been the keepers of this knowledge much more than the valley and the city folk. The city folk are the anthropologists. They're the ones that are, going out like me with a recording device and writing all this stuff down or recording these stories. The hill folk in and of themselves were mostly, this oral culture. And it's a shame, but that's the culture that's dying out right now.
Yeah.
So as people move away from the hills, as the hills are filling up with people, from California, people from all these other places, not to say anything bad about California or anything.
Yeah.
But as this land and property is being bought by people not from here, it's forcing the hill folk to make decisions. It's kind of forcing them to either move to town or move to these other areas. And that's where a lot of the tension comes in between traditional hill folk and their neighbors. And so I have several stories from people who have bought land out near national forests, and they always have that crazy neighbor, they call them, the crazy Ozark hill folk neighbor. And it's a cultural difference because, people aren't understanding that for the longest time, the only people that lived on the mountain were you and your family. And so if an outsider comes in, you don't know if they're going to try to hurt you, if they're going to try to steal your land, buy your land off of you, what. So, a lot of the tension that's coming is still based upon that importance of family, that importance of, only talking or only sharing with the people that you know and trust.
Yeah. When I lived in, am I getting a feedback?
Yeah.
When I lived in Hurricane Creek Wilderness, I had, much to my surprise, developed close relationships with the hill folk that were around me. I mean, they weren't close because I was really isolated, but when they found out that I was there, they made a point of connecting with me to make sure I was okay, and basically very quickly adopted me as one of their own. And I felt so safe with them because they really were keeping an eye on me. But it was mutual. I was helping them with the herbs because they had forgotten a lot of stuff. So it was a mutual exchange. But one of the things that I learned early on was that probably one of the most important qualities to observe was based on this notion of watching each other's back. And so I discovered that people were judged very quickly by how honest and truthful that they were with each other. So when they asked me difficult questions about, for example, what my spiritual orientation was, and I was concerned because I didn't think that I would fit in with what I thought might be kind of like a certain type of Christian orientation, I was real worried about how to talk with them about that. And I reflected on it and realized that the most important thing for me to do was just to tell them honestly where I was. And they were fine. Mm-hmm. There was nothing. It was like, and that was, I think, an important part of my acceptance was that I was honest with them. And if somebody's honest and truthful, that's somebody who's going to watch your back. Mm-hmm. And so.
Nice.
Yeah. The importance of, the way your actions speak, the honesty, not having that disconnect between what you're saying to them and how you're acting. Mm-hmm. Because, I think historically, people in the Ozarks, especially the hill folk, have been kind of viewed in a very bad light as being uneducated. And, a lot of them may not have formal education, but they're not stupid people. No. They're very perceptive people, and they're very, a lot of times, very wise people. Mm-hmm. And so I think that speaks to that putting that importance upon, honesty and being able to pick up if you're telling a lie too.
Oh yeah, they were very intuitive. And so anyway, I have great respect for the hill folk. Mm-hmm. And I hope that culture still has places to hold out and keep going.
Yeah, and that's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think that's part of the attraction of this area, Eureka Springs. Mm-hmm. It has always remained a small residential community. It's integrated rather well with the natives of the environment. And yet, it's become a tourist town, but people just flow through. And yet the arts and the folklore is still pretty prevalent. It's part of the vocabulary of this community. Mm-hmm. So I love hearing, this background, and now it's just kind of sparking like recognition of where that exists in this mm-hmm. community.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, we're getting close to the end of the show. So is there anything else you wanted to share with us that you haven't gotten to yet?
Well, one of the things that I did want to talk about while we're on the subject of foraging and plants and things like that, one of the things that I like to do when I'm talking to groups that I'm taking out is to talk about native plant herbalism. And that's really where I find myself sort of fitting into. I for the longest time, I worked with, the European plants, European herbalism, things like that. And that has something to offer here in the Ozarks also. But one of the areas that I'm focusing more on these days is that native plant herbalism, working with plants that are native here, plants that people don't really know about. Like we have the white-leafed mountain mint, we have common dittany, we have all of these native mint plants that are very powerful plants to work with. Dittany is one of the best fever breakers I have. If you make it like a tea, it's a diaphoretic, so it'll make you sweat. And I use that over any prescription medication for fevers. You just drink a cup of that and you'll sweat out the fever overnight. And it's very effective in that way. So we have all of these really nice native plants here. And I encourage people, if you, especially if you live in the Ozarks, is to, learn about these native plants. If you're an herbalist, maybe try to incorporate some of these native plants into the medicine that you're doing, medicine that you're working. If you're a gardener, certainly grow these plants. These are great for our pollinators. They're great for our bees, butterflies. They're great for everything. And a lot of times the native plants are much easier to grow in this area too, because they're used to it. Hard to get started sometimes, but easy to grow after they get established. So the native plant herbalism is a big part of the work that I do. And that goes hand in hand with Ozark folk medicine, Ozark folk magic, preserving this culture and helping to pass it on, not just in theory, not just as written works, but as an actual practice, as an actual culture that is still alive today. And you can still see it all over the place. Like you were talking about with Eureka Springs, if you talk to anybody that's lived here most of their life even, and sometimes even if they just live in rural areas, they'll always have a story about folk healing. Either their neighbor tried to give them some weird concoction or they themselves were told something. All of these stories are still here. And part of, my life's work is to help live that culture and help educate people about that culture. I'm happy to keep doing it.
Yeah, you can still get some good dandelion wine in these parts.
Oh, yeah. Elderberry wine, rose wine, all of these good things.
Well, it's been a real pleasure spending this time with you, Brendan. I just love the knowledge and information you've shared. And Dakota, Grannywoman, always an honor. I love the way the worlds are meeting here. I want to thank you.
Thank you.
And I am looking forward to connecting with more of our local healers. And so anybody who has suggestions of who to bring on, please let me know, because
absolutely,
it's meant to be a forum for all of us herbal knowledge keepers. That's how we keep it alive.
Yeah.
By sharing it, by sharing the stories, by talking with each other. It's a community art. And so thank you very much, Brandon. I've been wanting to hear more from you for a long time. I've read a lot of your writing. It's very good. And folks who've been on your nature walks have spoken highly of you. So thank you very much for being here, and we'll just have to do this again sometime.
Yes, I would love that. Thanks for inviting me on. It's been a good chat.
Absolutely.
I don't know if the show's over, but we seem to be.
No, Biggie takes his cue from us when we're saying our goodbyes and closure. And the reason I had nothing to report from the chat room, there was no chat room happening, but we did have viewers that I know they're out there, and I always invite them, if you want, add feedback to the Get Lit page in Facebook. Let us know.
And people can always email me. It's just mountainmanhealing@gmail.com.
There you go.
So I am happy to answer questions. Like I said, if people are local to Northwest Arkansas area, it's about to get busy for me right now with doing plant walks and things like that, but I have a schedule on my website for all of that stuff if people are interested. I also do plant assessment. So if you have land in the area, but you don't know what's on the land, I will go out with you and show you everything that I can and tell you how to use it, tell you how to pick it, harvest it. So that's a service I offer to people if they are interested.
Very good. And your website has been advertised on the broadcast window as well as your name. So anyone who has watched it live or sees the archive, they'll know how to find you.
And this show will be archived in several places, including in the Herbal database.
All right, everyone.
Thank you for
being
here and for watching the archive. and for joining us in our love of plants and healing and the Ozarks, of course.
Thank you.
If we want to change the world, we must first change the media. Mainstream media exists for the purposes of indoctrination and manipulation of public perception. The world of free and independent media is growing, and with the upsurge in information now available in the public domain, it has never been easier to access free and independent media. The exploration of this information resulted in an experimental project which would provide a fully supported space for researchers, whistleblowers, and seekers of all kinds to express themselves and educate the world. On the 1st of January 2015, Conscious Consumer Network was launched to the world. Nobody thought we would make it this far, but CCN is the longest running free and independent media network of its kind. CCN is a unique collaboration of hearts and souls, bringing you information from different perspectives to educate and inform. Since we started CCN, we have had only one desire: the pursuit of a free, fair, just, sustainable world, and this has not changed. Having overcome many challenges over the last 2 years, CCN is here to stay, and we've got great things lined up for 2017. Help keep CCN on the air by supporting the 2017 Network Support Fund.